So, David, I'd love to hear your take on how does poor sleep affect mental health in the workplace?
Yes, good question. So there's a very direct relationship between your sleep and your mental health. And the term that you'll come across is a bi-directional relationship. So what I mean by that is that we've known for many years that certain mental health conditions will disrupt your sleep. So anxiety can make it quite difficult to fall asleep, and depression often causes early morning waking, not all the time, but quite often. But we know from research that actually works the other way as well. And poor sleep will actually cause anxiety and cause depression.
Hmm.
And the relevance of that is if poor sleep is both the cause and an effect of a mental health condition, that as a system it can feed into itself, and you end up with these rapidly escalating cycles where both your mental health and your sleep gets quite disrupted and can get worse. And when this is the case, we know that the best approach is actually to address both your sleep and your mental health at the same time. And you can see that in a workplace where there are challenges to mental health, challenges to sleep, that it's very easy for these two to escalate.
Absolutely. So, are we right in assuming that better sleep can really boost productivity for workers?
Yeah, I mean, productivity is a really interesting area, but sleep is a key part of that. And one of the ways that you can view sleep is not so much valuing sleep itself, but valuing the way that it supports your daytime function. And performance is a part of that. And we work with a lot of high performance settings. So we work with Olympic athletes, we work with the Lionesses, with Premiership football, Formula One, and a lot of the reasons why they want us to work with them is actually about performance. So we would break performance into three. So you have your physical performance, your cognitive performance, and your emotional performance. Now, all three areas here are impacted by sleep, but particularly the last two. So cognitive and emotional performance are quite exquisitely sensitive to sleep.
That's really interesting. So, do you see a lot of the same issues working with people in the workplace that you do with these top performers in these teams, in these top performing teams?
We absolutely do. And one of our big views is that high performance is not owned by elite athletes. The high performance you see all the way through society. So you
Yeah.
see it in the board with people who have very difficult jobs, but you also see it with people who are single parents with multiple jobs and
Mhm.
three children, something like that. You couldn't ever call one of these situations high performance and not all three. They're all very challenging, and we use almost exactly the same approach in trying to improve sleep in these settings.
Yeah, I can really see that link. So I've heard, and we've all come across those high performers, those entrepreneurs that, can literally survive on 2 hours sleep a night. And actually they often brag about how little sleep they need. What's your advice? What would you say to those people that they're saying they're already operating at the top of their game and they're doing it on 2 hours sleep?
I mean, I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding about sleep. Sometimes it's viewed as like a break or laziness, but the value of sleep is really in supporting daytime function. So it's a key part of high performance. But what we all want really is this idea of sustainable high performance. So you're not trying to get a spike of productivity. You're trying to get good productivity over time. And so you actually have to take
Mm.
time for sleep. And you see that as you sleep better, as you have good quantity and quality of sleep, that your productivity does go up. So, I mean, people do vary in how much sleep they need. That's definitely a fact. But when people talk about how little sleep or things like the 5 a.m. club, that's usually from a place of misunderstanding about the
Mm.
value of sleep.
And I guess if you know you've got a big meeting tomorrow, or or you're doing a presentation, obviously sometimes that can come with quite a lot of stress and anxiety. So what would be your top tip for getting a good night's sleep when you've got that the next day to face?
It's another really good question. And actually, our approach here is very similar to our approach with elite athletes. If you're coming up to a big race or a big match, the night that you really need sleep is the night that you find it really hard to come by.
Yeah.
And it's the same. You encounter these scenarios through life. And so a big part is actually anticipating it. It's just a fact. It's just how we're made, is that when we are worried or stressed or in anticipation of something, that we tend to not sleep as well. So that is how we're made to an extent. But you can make things easier by pushing your bedtime a little bit later. So if you get into
Okay.
bed a little bit later, you're that much more sleepy, you're that much more driven for sleep when you get into bed, much more likely to fall asleep quicker and stay asleep. Compare that to going the other way. Sometimes if you think, oh, big day tomorrow, I need to get loads of sleep, and you get into bed at like 8, you're just not going to fall asleep. And you're going to be laying in bed for a long time, cogitating about tomorrow, and it's going to make things worse. But it's also about trusting your ability. That if you've put in all the practice, put in all the work, is to trust in your ability. So while sleep is a big part of performance, it's not the only part of performance. And even if you had a bad night's sleep, just trust in your ability to function despite that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very true. I often find that anyway. You kind of that night before something big, it does take some training. Just looking at a section of workers like shift workers, for example, where sleep is not regular. What are the impacts on what are the long-term mental health impacts for shift workers?
So shift working is tough, and there's a lot more people having to shift work now with these expectations of 24-hour production, 24-hour work presence is increasing, and it is difficult for multiple reasons. It does impact mental health. If you look at populations of shift workers as a whole, individually people cope differently with shift work, but as a population there are more mental health challenges, and it is multifactorial. So sleep's a big part of this. One of the key systems that controls sleep is this circadian rhythm. So this idea of the internal body clock. And if you're trying to sleep when everyone else is awake, at odds with your internal body clock, then that can cause worse sleep. And that shifting of your circadian rhythm could also disrupt your mental health. But it's other things as well. So people would normally report being more socially isolated if they're working shifts, that you don't see your family as much, you don't see your friends. You don't spend time on yourself, you don't exercise, you don't eat as well as you could. So all of these things impact our mental health. So it's not just sleep. And this is why it's always really important to have a joined up and holistic approach to shift worker and shift worker syndrome. Because you can get the situation better. That shift work is not a can of worms that you can't do anything about. That's often a pitfall that people fall in. But you can get this situation better. But the first thing is obviously to recognise that you are at a higher risk, and it is a difficult situation. So once you do that, once you do acknowledge things, then you can do something about it.
That was great. What's shift worker syndrome? Is that a thing? Is that a
Yeah, it's pedantry really.
Yeah,
So
not heard
insomnia
that. It
is
sounds good.
yeah. So insomnia, there's 5 points to insomnia. So chronic insomnia, so it should be a problem with either falling asleep or staying asleep, occurring at least 3 nights per week, for at least 3 months, affecting you during the day, but it should be despite adequate opportunity for sleep. So if you're working 12 jobs or you do night shifts, it's not so much that you haven't got the opportunity. So yeah, the issue is more that your opportunity to sleep. So shift worker syndrome is considered part of circadian rhythm disorders rather than insomnia, but it's all a bit pedantry because your approach to it is an adapted form of CBT for insomnia, which is the gold standard treatment for insomnia, and a few other bits and bobs. But yeah, to be honest, mostly when I talk to workplaces or individuals, I just call it insomnia because it just is
Yeah.
an unnecessary
Oh, okay.
level of
Interesting. Yeah, no, I've not
yeah.
heard that. Not heard that before.